kind of get this going here. So with that, I'm just going to talk for a couple seconds here and wait and sort of have a few more people joining us here. But first of all, I just want to say Happy New Year to everybody. This 2020 was a wild year. um, and Brent and I were actually talking yesterday about just how 2020 was challenging to say the least, especially in our business and a lot of restaurants and chefs. It was a very, very difficult time. And at the same time, 2020 ushered in some interesting ways of looking at the world, and one of them is this. These webcasts and much of this sustainability online activity that we're doing was really born out of the COVID situation of 2020. But 2021, I am really optimistic. I feel great about it. I think that this year is going to be incredible. And we're going to keep doing these webcasts on a monthly basis. So stay tuned for more of them. And like I've said in previous ones, if you have an idea about somebody that we should be talking to, somebody that somebody that's doing something really fascinating in the world of sustainability that can teach us and that can challenge us to do things a little bit differently, do things that'll improve the environment, please let us know, because we are all ears. Send an email to Lynn and say, hey, I know this person, and we'll take a look at that. So please, this is a community, and so you're all invited to give us some ideas so we can keep this fun and interesting for everybody. So Happy New Year, happy 2021. And with that, I'm going to just jump right in. It is, by the way, as I've said many times before, watching this chat and watching you all come in from all over the world absolutely makes my day. I'm here in Chicago at 7 in the morning, and I can't think of a better way to begin the day today. So, except, of course, to be talking to Brent Loken, who is joining us as our speaker slash interviewer slash the person I'll be talking with. Because he is a really important person. He's also, I think, the first time that we've had a scientist on our webcast, and that's super important. So just a brief introduction. He is the global food lead scientist, at the WWF Global Science. That's World Wildlife Fund. Correct, Brent? I got that right? I just want to keep saying foundation. Yeah, fun. But Brent is a global sustainability and food system scientist. His work focuses on feeding everyone on the planet healthy diets within planetary boundaries. He participated in several research and development projects in Borneo and has published work on food systems and environmental sustainability, including, and one of the big reasons you're here today, as the lead author on the EAT-Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health. So, Brent, a huge World Chefs welcome to you. And before I ask you any questions, I just want to sort of begin this by saying that the last time we all met in December, I sort of taught, if you will, the new module of the sustainability curriculum, that module number 8, which is all about nutrition and nutrition within the context of sustainability. And during that, I mentioned, I don't know how many times, about the EAT-Lancet report and how pivotal and foundational it was, especially to that topic that we talked about in December. So this is like the continuation of that. Having Brent with us today is an absolute honor. So Brent, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris.
And you're taking time out of a little ski holiday to join us, and that's like a double amazing.
yeah, just slowly ramping up and starting work again.
Well, thank you for doing that. And let's just kind of just jump right in, because as I mentioned, we talked a lot about this EAT-Lancet report the last time. So can you just talk a little bit about that? Maybe summarize it for those who haven't read this report. Your role as kind of the lead author on this, but tell me about it. What were its findings? Why was it so important? Because when it sort of hit the international press, it had a huge impact. So give us kind of the synopsis, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, it's pretty humbling because, as you said, it's a pretty influential report, and I would say that it probably even exceeded our expectations in terms of the potential that it has had and the impact that it has had. You know, I would say that I don't even know how many times that it's actually been cited in the academic literature, but even now, going on 2 years later, the impact that it still continues to have is quite something. It was really one of those landmark reports, and it was a huge honor to be working with so many amazing people on it. But our task from the beginning in terms of setting it out was, I think if I was to ask everybody here on this call, what is a healthy diet? Please define to me what is a healthy diet, or what is a sustainable diet? And please give me your definition of what that is. We would get wildly different responses. You know, health and what people should be eating is one of those very controversial topics. And also sustainability. Like, what does a sustainable diet actually mean? You know, people classify it differently. Some people will say it's about biodiversity. Some will say it's about water. Some will say it's about local food. Some will say it's about organic food. So what we wanted to do with this commission was to bring together the top scientists in the world and to bring some consensus to what defines a healthy and sustainable diet, first of all. So let's set global scientific targets for what defines healthy food, what foods we should be eating to optimize our health. That was one task. The second task was then when we produce our food, how much impact can we have on the overall planet in order to be able to produce that? What are the boundaries that we can have on it? So we wanted to set those limits in terms of the overall environmental impact that it has. And the reason why that's important and why both of those are critically important is because food is the number one impactor of human health today. The food that we consume is right now the leading cause of death worldwide. There's more and more people that are dying of diabetes, obesity-related diseases, heart diseases, cancers, and a lot of that is driven by the food choices that we make. So defining what optimizes human health is absolutely critical. On the other side, food is the number one impact on the planet today, environmental impact. It uses almost 70% of water goes into food. It's a leading cause of biodiversity loss, one of the leading causes of greenhouse gas emissions, one of the leading causes of land use. I mean, 40% of our planet is used for actually producing food. So when you put those together, food is a big issue. It's got the potential to do great harm, like we're seeing, but it also has a great potential to do great good. As everybody knows on this call, food is a powerful medium to be able to communicate, to be able to touch people, we all have those experiences with food, so it has that dual potential. So we defined what is a healthy diet, we defined what is a sustainable diet, and then we brought those together and said, is it possible to actually feed this healthy diet and do it within the boundaries that the earth has placed upon us and do it for 10 billion people on the planet? Is that actually doable? And what we found is that it actually is possible. We can feed every single person on this planet healthy food within environmental limits without destroying the planet. And that was a pretty important finding. But on the stark side is that the wiggle room for doing that is extremely small, in terms of we don't have a lot of wiggle room to be able to achieve that, and we have to start very, 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 very quickly.
So in essence, one of the things that was my big takeaway is that, eating a healthy diet for me is very much a healthy diet for the planet. Would you agree with that? I mean, and talk maybe a little bit about, it's not a one size fits all.
No.
And that's one of the things I loved about this is it took the world, but then also cut it up into pieces in terms of countries that are like the US, where I am, where we eat vast amounts of meat, versus other countries where that's not the case.
Yeah, one of the biggest criticisms that we had from this report was individuals that said, well, what you're proposing with this healthy diet that optimizes human health is this one size fits all diet, but that's absolutely not the case. We proposed food groups, so by fruits and vegetables, whole grains, uh, red meats, white meats, dairies, eggs. So we broke it down by food groups, and we provided an intake range for each one of those. But that varies wildly depending on where you live. So in some places, the whole grains could come from wheats. In other places, it could come from rice. In some places, the fruits could be bananas. In other places, the fruits could be something else. And within that range, the amount of wiggle room that it actually provides is quite a bit. And the red meat consumption level that we recommended, well, no, we're not recommending. It's the scientific literature which is saying how much red meat should we be eating to optimize our health. It's about a single serving, about 28 grams per day, or a single serving per week. As you pointed out, Chris, in many parts of the world, that's a lot less than what most of the world is consuming. However, there is a lot of the world which is not consuming even that amount of red meat. So what we need to do is figure out what is how we take this diet and make it local. And this is where chefs can come in, and they can take it and take the targets that we've set and really be able to localize it. And then be able to take the red meat consumption. And in some places, we have to drastically reduce red meat consumption. In other places, we might have to increase consumption. The only way that we can do that is if we're all on board with this and we all support it, and the world comes together around these goals.
One of the things you just said struck me, and that is that, in excuse me, we had one slide in our presentation in December, in that new curriculum piece, that was all about where do you get your information from, and how do you know if that information is valid, or if it's just somebody crazy spouting off their opinions slash beliefs somewhere on the internet. And I think, Brent, you said something which just struck me, which is, this is not our recommendation, because that would make it personal. Like, hey, Brent says cut back on the red meat, and then somebody could say, well, forget Brent, I like my red meat. But what I love about this is that it is scientifically based. And that's something, science is empirical, right? I mean, science is something that's provable, and that's, you can demonstrate with numbers. It's something we can rely on versus opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even in the report, the targets that we sent were not recommendations. As a commission, we did not have the authority to recommend this diet or recommend the amount of impact. All we could say is, let's review the literature and report back in terms of what the literature is saying and in terms of what people should do. It's governments that need to be putting forth the recommendations. And that's why the connection of these targets to national dietary guidelines and the education which is happening within individual countries is so critical. That's where the recommendations come from. Also important to note here is that we tend to harp on red meat quite a bit, and we tend to say, well, we should reduce our consumption of red meat. And I think a more positive spin on this is to say, well, let's increase our consumption of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, the things that we know that are absolutely good for us. So we increase our individual consumption of those foods, and that automatically will have to then reduce the overall consumption of meat that we take. And we need to start thinking about red meat not being the center of our plate, which is so often the case. We put the meat smack dab in the center, and we put maybe a little garnish of some fruits and some vegetables and some things around it. No, what we need to do is the red meat has to be on the side, and the fruits and vegetables, we need to build the plate around that, because the science is absolutely clear on the health benefits of those foods.
That was a couple other slides from our presentation in December. Brent, this is great. You're just like reinforcing everything we did. So I feel validated. So tell me, a little bit about, and I know in the EAT-Lancet report, there is a little section there about food service and about chefs, and what can we do with this? We live in a world where our job ultimately is to, run a business, and to make the customer happy and give them what they want. And at the same time, we know that we have an added responsibility to think about sustainability. And in doing so, as we learned in December, to also think about nutritional, benefits to our consumers. What would be your advice to, chefs in light of the EAT-Lancet report? Like, what should we do with this? And Yeah, your advice to the people who are here, because chefs live in a really practical world. You know, we have a job to do. How can this benefit us?
You know, I think chefs, in terms of being some of the key influencers, like where is this going to come from? Like, how are we going to get everybody on board to be able to adopt these recommendations? We know that food is causing a lot of disease worldwide. We know that it's having an impact on the environment. We know that it has to change. So with this report, we provided global recommendations. But how do we actually take those global recommendations and turn them into action? You know, this is one of those key uh, missing links sometimes that we have with some of these global reports. We have these global recommendations, but then people say, but what do I do? And this is where I think chefs have an unbelievable power to, as influences in your community, in your city, in your country, to be able to say, look, this is where we want to head. This is where the world is going. I have a responsibility to the people that come to my restaurant to eat my food, that I'm going to serve them something which is good for the body and also good for the planet. And I'm going to do it in a way that's tasty, because one of the misperceptions that people have about this diet that we are saying that we should be eating, this healthy food, is that healthy food it doesn't taste good. You know, if you eat only vegetables, if you eat like this, it's not going to fill me. Number one, I'm going to be hungry after the meal. So I need that meat in order to be able to fill me. And also, it's not going to taste good. And I think chefs can play that role of saying, hey, that's not true. Actually, a shift towards more plant-based foods is actually extremely healthy. It can nourish us. It can nourish our soul. It can nourish our bodies. And that's something that I think we have to rediscover. And chefs can play a pivotal role here.
You know, honestly, Brent, you should have just taught the thing in December instead of me, because these are because we talked about that. We talked about taste. We talked about the fact that, what do we do as chefs? What are we good at, right? What we're good at is making things that taste great and making our customers smile and have a great time. But it starts with that beautiful experience and delicious food. But you know, you said something also that kind of was interesting to me, which is, you know, from a marketing standpoint, right? I mean, you know, could you sort of leverage this in restaurants to say, you know, sort of as a manifesto, if you will, to the client that says, look, I care about you and I care about the planet, and I'm going to make, you know, nutritious food that's going to make you healthy, you know, or healthier or whatever, and is going to be good for the planet to ensure, you know, the planet stays healthy. But I'm never going to sacrifice taste or creativity. So, I mean, if you kind of think about, you know, saying that outright, because you're right, many times when people would talk about, I'm serving healthy food, um, the impression is going to be terrible. The joke was in our country, in the U.S., that we have an association called the American Heart Association, which way back in the day, they came up with an idea of a heart healthy dish, which is you'd put a little red heart next to the dish if it met their criteria. You know what we discovered? That was the kiss of death for that menu item. Because the minute the heart was there, nobody wanted it because they assumed that it would taste bad. But I think to kind of go out and just say, this is who I am as a chef. I love you, customer. I care about you. I care about the planet. And you will walk out of here smiling because I'm going to make great food. That's like a win-win-win.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's been some work that's been done on this where they found that if you put the vegetarian dishes in the menu over to one side, or if you call it vegetarian burger, or if you call it vegetarian something, nobody buys it. But if you call it tasty something burger, it's vegetarian. But you name it differently and you put it somewhere else in the menu, people are going to buy it. And I think at the end of the day, when individuals walk into and when they want to order something, it's less about eating meat and more about tasting something that actually, or eating something that tastes good. And if we can bust the myth that healthy food doesn't taste good, that is going to be an absolute huge win for everybody. But we also have to teach people how to cook this way. One of the things that I found is that, a lot of chefs are trained with having meat at the center. Meat is a main dish that you serve and you build your food, with. And that a lot of chefs don't know how to produce and cook this healthy vegetarian or plant-based foods. And therefore, we also need a very rapid and an accelerated program to be able to train chefs and to be able to make food this way. And that's something that we also have to focus on.
All right. So for all the people who are on this webcast today, who are in the world of culinary education, Brent just gave you a challenge. And for the rest of us at World Chefs, he also just gave us a challenge to think about this in the context of working chefs. So thank you. Hey, Brent, I'm going to ask you one quick question, then we're going to get to some questions here. But you're now at WWF. What are you working on right now? So we've talked about EAT-Lancet, but what are you doing now?
So the main focus of the work that we're doing right now at WWF and that I'm leading is to take these global targets and recommendations and to translate them into what it means for everybody, what it means for policymakers, what it means for individual countries, what it means for chefs, what it means for cities. And it's really that translation of these global recommendations into more local actionable targets that people know what to do with is the work that we're focusing on right now. And I think that's absolutely critical because I think a lot of individuals, when they see these global targets, they know that climate change is important and biodiversity loss is really bad and they've got to serve healthy food. But what does it mean for me? How can I make an impact? How can I digest this? So that is the main work that we're doing and the main focus that we will have going forward. And next year, or this year now, is a very important year because the first UN Food Systems Summit will be held next October. End of September, I believe. And that's a chance for the entire world to come together and to really wrap our heads around how we change the entire food system globally to be able to deliver healthy food to everybody. And a lot of this work will feed into that.
That's really fascinating. Now that's geared towards governments and sort of top-down approach a little bit. Is that right?
It's more of a top-down approach, but yes, but also it's also being hailed as a people summit. In terms of the summit is really trying to mobilize a bottom-up approach as well. Realizing that without the bottom-up movement, we won't be able to get the top down. So I would say that at most summits, it's pretty unprecedented the amount of effort which is being put into really mobilizing more the bottom-up people's voices to make sure that they're heard at this. So I would encourage everybody here to get involved in the summit, and there are opportunities to actually host and participate in national level dialogues. And I think this would be a great way for chefs to get involved in hosting and putting together some of these national level dialogues that'll feed directly into the UN summit and influence international policy so that we can put forth and propose a Paris climate change agreement for food and for food systems. And that would be absolutely landmark.
Fascinating. Well, I think that this is, to everybody on this webcast, this is something that I think, Brent, let's talk about offline and about how World Chefs can be involved in that. I think that's really, really interesting. We can get the information out to all of you on that. So I'm looking at some questions. I've seen in the chat, there's a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, if you put them in the chat, they sort of scroll through my through my screen really quickly, and I can't get to them. If you put them in the Q&A, I can see them here. But let's go ahead and I'm going to see if I can get some of these. Some of these right. So there's a question here about the Netherlands. And so the ideal dishes in the Netherlands would be 80% of vegetables and 20% meat in the dish. Is it a step forward? What's your view on this? Does that sound kind of about right, or is it just really dependent upon the country?
It's definitely not country specific, it's more person specific. So I would say that regardless of where you live, a ratio of 80% more plant-based to 20% more animal-based seems about right in terms of overall proportion. In terms of meat, that if you would choose one meat over the other, it's more the white meats, it's the fishes, it's the chickens that have less impact and are a bit better for your body. So that proportion, I would say, sounds about right.
Excellent. All right. There was a question also about organics, and how does organic food fit into what you've worked on, or is it not really part of that?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to stay away from looking specifically at certain types of production systems like organic food or local food or you- mainly because there's a lot of passion and a lot of personal feelings about certain types of ways that we produce food as being one that's better than the other. And the reason that we wanted to do that is we wanted to say, okay, we have to avoid panaceas. There is not a single solution that's going to get us there. In some cases, organic food might be good. And in some cases, organic food might actually work. In other cases, it might not be the best option. So what we're saying with the targets that we set for sustainable food is let's put aside names and labels. Let's just say all the food that we produce has to be produced within the targets that we've set for greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, water use, land use, and everything else. And if it's done within that, regardless of the label, then it's sustainable. Could be organic, could be, but it doesn't have to be. And that's one of the things as human beings, I think we have a tendency to want to latch on to a single idea as being the thing that will save us. And unfortunately, that's not the case. It's much more complex than that.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the things that is in the EAT-Lancet report. And again, for all of you who have not read it, please just take the time to read it because it really is, it's thorough. And I think and one of the great things that it does is really look at what is, what that means for different parts of the world, etc. There's a quick question here. Are all vegan diets sustainable? I thought that's a really interesting question.
I would say that all vegan diets are probably, and I'm with the emphasis on probably sustainable. They definitely have a less impact than many non-vegan diets, or especially a diet that's heavy in animal source foods. But a vegan diet doesn't necessarily have to be healthy. And this is one of the important things about labels is that just because you're eating a vegan diet does not mean that it's good for your body. I mean, you can drink Coca-Cola and that's actually a plant-based food, right? I mean, you can, sugar is a plant-based food. And just because you're vegan, you could be eating a lot of really unhealthy snacks and foods. And that's why we emphasize healthy and sustainable as being more important than vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, or any other type of label.
Very, very interesting. Okay, now we're getting a million questions here. So this is kind of the same, maybe it's the same question. What is your opinion of veganism? I think you just answered that.
Local food, though, I see that there's something about local food too, and I think that's also an important thing, very similar to organic food in terms of we have to avoid labels and we have to avoid panaceas. In some cases, local food is very important, and that's the best way of producing food. In other cases, we find that eating locally has a negative impact on the environment. Especially in countries that are facing serious burdens of undernutrition, and they have to increase consumption of certain foods in those countries. So if you're looking at Madagascar, Malawi, Indonesia, India, in some cases where they have to focus on raising nutrition status, feeding a population more foods, if you focus only on local food in those circumstances, then in some cases you might actually have to cut down more trees, turn more of this natural habitat into croplands. So that's why in many cases, local food can actually have a negative impact. And the best way of solving this problem is by increasing trade. So sometimes local food works, in other cases it doesn't. Once again, we can't focus on a single solution as being a one solution to save us.
All right, I've got a couple really quick ones and we're gonna have to wrap it up here. And by the way, all of a sudden I'm getting a million questions, so thank you. And maybe afterwards we can try to do some of these, offline. But there's a question here about a pH. Oh, it just went away. A pH diet. I'm not sure if I know what that is.
Is that
I've
the
read
planetary health diet?
I don't know, but it's basically the question is that I've read a report that pH diet is too expensive worldwide. What can be done to systematically change this to make it possible?
Yeah, the planetary health diet. So the one from the EAT-Lancet.
Okay. Yeah.
There has been some work that's been done on, is it too expensive, and is eating healthy more expensive than not? And it's mixed. In some cases, eating healthy is more expensive than in other places. In some cases, it actually costs less. There's been some work out of Canada and Australia where they found that eating a planetary health diet with a reduced consumption of animal source foods actually decreases your food bill, because you're buying less of the very expensive foods, which is like red meat. So I would say, once again, that's very context specific and needs to be looked at in individual countries. But we all need to make sure that healthy food is accessible to every single person on this planet. That should be a human right that we take seriously, and we put in whatever policies in place to be able to ensure that everybody can afford it.
Love it. Does the report set targets for meat reduction and timelines to reach this, said reduction?
Yeah, so if you look at the planetary health diet that we put forward, the optimal intake range for red meat, we put forth between 0 and 28 grams per day. So that's 1 to 2 servings of red meat per week. So that's the optimal intake range. And what we're saying is that between now and 2050, we have to get a majority of the global population to be eating within that limits. That means in some cases drastically reducing consumption of red meat, in other cases and in other countries raising it.
All right, last question. How does the report from WWF, which maybe is the EAT-Lancet Report, differ from the Nordic nutrition recommendation for 2012?
So I would say the Nordic countries are doing quite well when it comes to some of their recommendations. The Nordic countries are some of the most progressive in terms of what they are recommending. So I would say they're very similar and they're trending in the right direction. But even the recommendations that we're putting forward, sorry, they're not recommendations. What the science is saying in terms of optimal intake levels, especially for red meat, is more ambitious than what many countries are even looking at, including the Nordics.
Awesome. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up with this, but before I get to saying thank you, I just want to make 2 quick comments here, because there were 2 questions that I'm going to address just very, very quickly. One was on competition and world chefs, and and some of these recommendations are not recommendations; they are science-based facts, if you will. I think we should really seriously in the World Chefs community think about this. Really. So that's for the World Chefs leadership to think about. And then there's one last one here, which I love this question, which is how can chefs and nutritional / health professionals work together? And, traditionally, that's not always been a really happy relationship, or a good one, quite frankly. And I think, the big thing there is none of this is going to be super successful unless we chefs and those in the health and medical fields can work very, very closely together. And there are lots of models out there of this happening. It's super interesting. But my recommendation for you would be, as a chef, reach out to the people in your community who are in, the health side of nutrition / medicine. Reach out to them and build those bridges, because once we can build those bridges and make those connections, now we get into the world of how do we take the information that they have and they know and apply our wherewithal, which is how to make food taste great. And once we put those 2 together, we learn from each other. And I think it's up to us chefs. We're great at hospitality. We can build those bridges and make that happen. So, Brent said earlier, and he took the words right out of my mouth, which is the power of the white jacket. We talk about that all the time. We chefs, we have an amazing ability to change the world, and never, ever, think otherwise. We can change it from the bottom up, and we can change it from top down. And many of us have access to people in leadership positions, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to take that very seriously. Lynn, before we wrap up, I know Lynn wants to just say a couple things. Lynn, of course, is the amazing person that makes all of this possible and is part of the World Chefs staff. Lynn, hello. Talk to us.
Hello. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I regret not dressing up for this. And on behalf of World Chef Office, I just want to say thank you so much for such a great session that kicks off 2021. It's wonderful to start with science always. And The second big thanks goes to our audience here today. It's our 8th episode, and you have always been there. You are the motivations, you are the inspiration behind all the activities that we've been doing throughout the years. So thank you so much to all the chefs, to all the educators, and to all the sustainability enthusiasts that we have online today and in the previous episodes. Very much looking forward to see you in the upcoming episodes. We plan to have the 9th episode on the last Tuesday of February, so please stay tuned for my update. As at the moment, we have an upcoming webinar for culinary school managers and training program managers who wish to become World Chef Education Partner. Is next Wednesday at the same time. So if you are interested, please go and check it out on latest at worldchef.org, and registration is open for free. And I think that's the end of our session today. Happy New Year. Very happy to be here. Chris, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I just, Lynn, thank you very much. And thanks for turning your camera on so everybody can see you, because she's always there behind the scenes. But, we had probably around 250, probably more chefs joining us from all over the world today. You're the reason I get up at 5 in the morning to do this. And I just, I want to say thank you and Happy New Year. And of course, a huge thank you, Brent, taking time out of your holiday to join us today and really give us a lot of inspiration and challenge us. So a million thank yous for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure, Chris. I mean, the work that you guys are doing is so great. I mean, you guys are such important stakeholders, and and it's absolutely no problem to take time out of my holiday, because the next decade that we're facing is the most important decade for our species, for every person on this planet. So we're all in this together. So being able to share some thoughts, it's my honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, to everybody, a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in February. Send us emails with ideas, questions, etc. And with that, have a wonderful morning. Have a great afternoon. Have a lovely evening. And for those of you in Australia and New Zealand, finish that glass of wine and go to bed. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thank you.